I remember the sun filtering through the high windows of the gymnasium, painting gold patterns on the polished floorboards as I took my place on the bleachers. The murmurs of families and friends rose like a tide, drowning out the steady thump of my heart against my ribs. 14 years of my life. School runs in drizzle and heat, birthday candles flickering at kitchen tables, hospital corridors at midnight and dawn, rent checks folded neatly in envelopes, whispered bedtime prayers for two kids who were never mine by blood, had led to this moment. Today they would graduate. Today they would speak. Today they would thank everyone who mattered. And then they would finally show the world who didn't. My stepdaughter Alyssa, tall in her cap and gown, walked forward first, shoulders straight, chin held high. I stood a little, clapped a little, smiled like a man proud of his children, though my throat was tight. The gym quieted as she raised the microphone. In that moment, her eyes swept the room, finding mine for a heartbeat, just long enough for me to think she might surprise me with gratitude, then move on. Thank you to all our teachers, our friends, and especially the people who stuck by us, she began, voice steady. My chest swelled at the mention of people who stuck by us, that had to include me. My palms itched, my fingers curled around invisible bills I had never asked to be paid. Mom, thank you for your strength. Applause. Dad, she paused, and the second it happened the world seemed to tilt. Thank you for showing up. I felt a strange relief mixed with pride until she finished the sentence. But most of all, thank you to our real dad, the one who carried us in his blood, not just carried us on his shoulders. We love you, Trevor. The gasp was simultaneous. Chairs scraped. A low groan rose from the bleachers. I stayed standing, cheered harder, offered the widest grin I could manage, as though her words were a joke I didn't quite get. My mind whirled, replaying the thousands of times I had arrived with scraped knees, lunchboxes half-eaten, science fairs assembled at midnight, broken down cars and broken hearts alike rescued when their mother worked late. I smiled so much my cheeks ached. I tipped my hat at Trevor, who had slouched forward from the back row, as if crossing an invisible finish line. Suddenly the ceremony moved on. The next speaker cleared her throat, and I sat down, my heart thudding in my ears like a warning drum. I heard Carmen whisper something breathless to her friend, but I didn't care. The world narrowed to the two faces on stage and the echo of "loser" that seemed to reverberate in my skull. Later, when the ceremony ended and caps soared like birds over the roof beams, I followed the crowd toward the exits. Parents milled about, embracing graduates, wiping tears, snapping photos. Alyssa and Jordan drifted toward Carmen and Trevor, their arms already reaching for the phone that would capture a reunion decades in the making. I walked past, blinking against the flash of smiles, feeling the quiet crack of something inside me. It wasn't rage, it was bone-deep emptiness. I had paid the bills, driven every carpool, held back tears in hospitals, yet here I was invisible. My reflection in the glass doors looked like a man who had lived a lifetime only to have it dismissed in 7 words. I traced the outline of my hands at my sides, reminded myself those hands weren't empty. They had built dinners, repaired bikes, held homework through tears. But no one heard their story today. No one would. Weeks later, I'd replay that moment over coffee in my quiet kitchen, the sunlight dancing on my mug as though mocking me. I'd let my eyes close and imagine the applause for me, imagine Alyssa's voice adding, "And thank you to the man who never gave up on us." But each time my eyes opened to emptiness, no applause, no gratitude, only silence. Somewhere in that pause between her words and my smile, something fundamental shifted. The next morning, I would bury my hurt under polite conversation. I would thank people for their congratulations. I would keep breathing. But part of me had snapped. Snapped quietly, without fanfare, like a twig breaking deep in the forest. And I knew, even then, the man who paid the bills was gone. In his place stood someone else entirely, forged in that breathless moment when love and recognition diverged, and I discovered what it feels like to be unmade by words spoken by the ones you raised. I wasn't in the family photos, and that omission stung more than any insult they'd thrown. From behind the camera's lens, I watched as Carmen positioned Alyssa and Jordan between herself and Trevor, crafting an image that conformed to the story she preferred. I'd grown accustomed to being the man in the background, the one who lugged trays of snacks to after-school meetings, who knelt on the floor to help with math homework, who stayed up late to iron uniforms for picture day, yet never quite part of the picture itself. That afternoon, I slipped into the clustering crowd at the back of the ceremony hall, adjusting the crease in my tie though no one asked why I fussed with it. The portraits lining the walls bore his smiling face alongside theirs, but mine had been airbrushed away long ago. I felt a pang every time I glimpsed the old snapshots. My arm around Jordan's shoulders at the science fair, me and Alyssa beaming beside her first trophy, cast in bronze, still warm from the foundry. Those moments were mine, too, but they were never advertised as such. Outside, Carmen's laughter chimed like bells through the lobby as she congratulated Trevor on stepping up at last. He stood stiff, as if wearing a borrowed skin, his posture rigid and practiced for the camera. I watched their reunion with a smile so measured it felt like a prosthetic. I had worn that same smile countless times, when I arrived at soccer games, baseball batting practice, piano recitals, school award ceremonies. Everywhere I went, I arrived early and stayed late. But when those snapshots were carefully cropped for social media, my face always ended up at the edge, half hidden by the frame. In those images, I was the fall guy, the silent extra in someone else's starring role. I felt the familiar tingle in my throat, the one that trickled up when I suppressed an unwanted emotion. I had learned early on in our marriage to swallow the ache of exclusion and carry on. After all, Carmen had chosen me. She'd married me when her children were toddlers, and she needed someone reliable. That had been the agreement, love them as my own, no questions asked, and in return, I'd get a family. Instead, I'd become a property manager for whims, a bank for the whims of two teenagers and the occasional interloper who claimed paternity rights only on milestone days. Jordan paddled a hand through his hair and waved for me from across the lobby. He had that same mischievous tilt to his head that his mother carried, a reminder of his childhood, when he would hide behind me at parties and cling to my leg in crowded rooms. I waved back, then forced myself to look elsewhere. I didn't want him to see the disappointment in my eyes. Instead, I let my gaze drift over the rows of decorated mortarboards piled in a makeshift display, each one a promise of futures waiting to be fulfilled. I remembered tacking those caps onto a corkboard at home, one for each of their birthdays, each painted with inside jokes and cartoon characters. We'd spent Sunday afternoons decorating them with glitter and adhesive gems, my idea, to lift their spirits when middle school got hard. Now those caps sat here, on display for all the parents to admire, but they were trophies for someone else. Carmen swept past me in a swirl of pastel chiffon, her alabaster skin gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She offered me a tight smile, one that had something beneath the surface. I had practiced interpreting that smile for years. Sometimes it meant pride, sometimes guilt, and sometimes the relief of having a partner who would do the heavy lifting without complaint. Today, it felt like an apology unspoken. I returned her smile with a nod that said, "I see you," though I doubted she truly did. Later, when the hall emptied and custodial staff began wheeling in mop buckets, I slipped away through a side door into the garage where I kept my car. The late afternoon sun slanted through the dusty windows, catching motes of dust that drifted like a careless snowfall. The garage smelled of oil and old cardboard. Boxes of memories, scrapbooks filled with crayon drawings, trophies tarnished by time, programs from every recital, lined the shelves. I traced my fingers along one box labeled Alyssa's Projects 2009 to 2016 and another labeled Jordan's Milestones. Each contained a tiny universe of my devotion. I closed the door behind me and leaned my head against the cool metal, exhaling until the muscles in my chest unclenched. I remembered when Carmen first handed me that first school project, a papier-mâché volcano with bubbling red vinegar lava. I had stayed up all night mixing flour paste, painting the crater edges, and tying tiny wires for the eruption effect. Alyssa had hugged me tight the next morning, her purple glitter freckles smudged across her cheeks. Jordan had high-fived me when his Pinewood Derby car won second place, only second, he teased, and I had ruffled his hair with pride. In those moments, I wasn't a placeholder. I was a father. Yet here I stood, alone, as though those memories belonged to someone else. I opened one of the boxes, running my hands over the soft binding of the scrapbooks. The pages crackled when I turned them. There are photos of my arm slung around Alyssa at her first dance recital, her skirt twirling like petals in bloom. There, Jordan, shy behind me at career day, me propping up his poster board to face the teachers. Every snap of the camera had captured the same truth. I showed up when they needed me. But the years of silence, the ignored invitations, the cold exclusion, they had stripped those moments of their power. Today, I realized, silence could be weaponized. I glanced at my watch. The sun had dipped lower, and the garage lights buzzed alive overhead. I reached for my phone, thumbs hovering over Carmen's contact. I could call her, ask for an explanation, demand respect. I could let anger erupt, fill the vacuum of invisibility with righteous indignation. But I didn't. Instead, I turned and left the garage without so much as a backward glance, carrying with me the weight of every unseen sacrifice. As I walked into the setting sun, the boxes of memories sat in dusty silence behind me. I knew in that moment that I had shown up for a family that didn't really want me. And for the first time, I felt the freedom in stepping away. I didn't know what came next, but I knew I would never be content to stand in the background again. That night, the house was hushed as I made my way upstairs, each step echoing through rooms heavy with memories I carried alone. The glow from the hallway light fell across the door to our closet, and I paused, shoulder brushing the frame as though bracing for an intrusion I'd been expecting for years. Behind that door sat the safe, our safe, the unremarkable steel box that had become the quiet vault of my devotion. I flicked off the hallway light and clicked the bedroom door closed, leaving the world of laughter and after-school chaos muffled behind a thin barrier of wood. In the darkness of our room, I could hear the late-night hum of Carmen's television, the gentle lilt of a sitcom laugh track drifting through the walls. I inhaled slowly, tasting the faint scent of her perfume on the air, and for a moment I thought about turning back, apologizing, explaining that my heart felt heavy but my intentions had always been pure. Instead, I walked to the closet and flipped the switch that illuminated the small overhead bulb inside. The safe's digital display glowed red, like a pair of watchful eyes waiting to be opened. I pressed the familiar buttons. First the 3, then the 7, then the 1, then the 4, the code I had memorized by heart after nights spent thinking I was doing the right thing. The lock clicked, and the door swung open on silent hinges. Inside lay 5 years of my quiet sacrifice, bundles of bonus checks from late shifts at the office, the crisp pages of annual tax refunds folded neatly into manila envelopes. The paper trail of every extra shift I had taken when school loans loomed large on the horizon. There was the check I had prepared 6 months ago for Alyssa's first semester tuition, the check I had printed in a moment of hope, neatly addressed in my careful handwriting. I remembered the pride I felt, imagining the relief it would bring her when she saw that money waiting to unlock a future she had earned. But tonight, that check sat among its fellows, as cold and meaningless as a ticket to someone else's celebration. I reached inside and lifted the stack, fingers grazing the edges of envelopes that bore names and numbers I no longer recognized as mine. My heart throbbed like a wounded animal, and it felt strange to hold the very evidence of my devotion as though it were an object to be discarded. I laid the collection on the floor of the closet and pressed a hand to my chest, feeling the pulse beneath my palm. The blood that had once fueled my every act of kindness now sang a different tune. A tune of quiet resolve that whispered, "Enough." My hands trembled not with sorrow but with the cold certainty of a decision made long ago. I reached for the printed check labeled Alyssa Carter, College Fund, turned it over to study her name, the gentle curves of her handwriting, Alyssa Carter, Fall 2025 tuition. I could almost hear her voice reading those words, imagining the relief that would flood her when she saw that final deposit hit her account. But that moment would not come. With deliberate calm, I returned the check to its envelope, sealed it, then gathered every envelope in my hand. I stepped forward, closing the safe door behind me and entering the code in reverse, the red display blinking until the lock caught and the steel door hissed shut. I left the closet, carrying the envelopes down the hallway as though they were a priceless load of gold. In the nursery, no longer a nursery, but the room where Leah had once been tucked in by candlelight, I paused. The crib had been long removed, replaced by a desk where Carmen and I had once helped her with algebra. Now it held stacked boxes for donation. I set the envelopes on the desk, the stack rising like a monument to promises broken. In the kitchen, the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the oven clock marked the passing seconds. I sank onto a stool at the island, the envelopes spread before me like tiles in a mosaic of betrayal and sacrifice. I thought of Carmen out there, smiling at Trevor as though the past 14 years had been a shared adventure, not a series of unpaid debts on my part. I thought of Jordan and Alyssa at orientation, confirming dorm assignments, laughing with new friends as though the world had always belonged to them, as though they had never needed me. My hand hovered above the stack, and then, with a single motion, I pressed the envelopes into the deep center drawer of the island, out of sight and out of mind. I clicked the drawer shut, the envelope still inside like a secret buried in cabinetry. I stood and poured myself a glass of water, ice clinking as I filled the tumbler. The cold liquid felt like truth sliding down my throat. I stared at the surface of the water as though it held answers. What would happen now? Who would notice? Who would chase me down for an explanation? An hour ago, I would have rushed to clear up any misunderstanding, to reassure Carmen that I was the same man who loved her children, who would die for them if necessary. Tonight, I realized that love had limits that bleeding hearts and empty wallets could not erase. I walked to the living room and sank into the couch, the cushions still shaped by memories of Sunday afternoons spent reading stories to two dozing heads. I pressed the tumbler between my palms and thought of the warmth in those small bodies, of the way they had pressed close when thunder shook the windows, of the way they had collapsed into laughter when I pulled a silly face. Tears didn't come. I felt nothing but a quiet resolve settling over me, as though I were stepping off a cliff into a vast unknown, without a backward glance. The television flickered with a rerun of a talk show, the host giving advice about family finances. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stood, set the glass on the coffee table, and walked out through the front door, leaving the house in darkness behind me. The night air was cool, and I inhaled deeply, tasting freedom tinged with regret. I closed the door softly and slipped into the car, the engine purring awake. As I drove away, I thought of the safe sealed shut with my affection locked inside, the envelopes tucked away in the kitchen drawer, and I understood that I had done exactly what I needed to do. In the silent transfer of money from shared pockets into secrecy, I had reclaimed a part of myself I thought lost. And with that reclamation came a steel in my spine, a promise that no one would ever take me for granted again. That night, after the last of the dinner dishes was stacked in the sink and the hum of late-night television lulled the house into drowsy quiet, I retreated to my study with the weight of every unpaid debt pressing on my shoulders. My steps were measured, deliberate, as I approached the desktop computer where I had once balanced budgets with a sense of pride, confident that every dollar I set aside was a brick in the foundation of a secure future for Alyssa and Jordan. Now that same foundation had been shaken to its core, and I was left wondering if the bricks would ever stand again. I sat in the leather chair, its surface worn by years of use, and logged into the family bank account. The numbers on the screen, 6 figures earmarked for tuition, room, board, living expenses, stared back at me like a neon sign of betrayal. My fingers hovered above the keyboard, trembling not from fear but from the realization that I was about to sever the last visible tie that bound me to this life of unreciprocated devotion. One by one, I clicked through the pages, selecting transfer funds, pausing to confirm that this was the correct account, the one Carmen could never access without my permission. The confirmation prompt glowed on the screen, asking me to verify the amount. I placed my palm on the mouse and exhaled, remembering the Sunday afternoon spent rehearsing cap and gown ceremonies in the living room, the whispered promises to attend their first lecture, to help them navigate the strange new world of freshman orientation. None of those promises mattered anymore, not if they came with an invisible price tag. I entered the destination account number, a new private account I had opened under a pseudonym in my own name, with no shared access. A single click later, the entire college fund disappeared from joint visibility, siphoned off into a hidden reservoir of my own making. The progress bar filled in seconds, and a message confirmed that the transfer was complete. A soft chime signaled my irrevocable decision. My chest tightened as I logged out and leaned back, staring at the empty balance where the tuition fund had once been displayed. I closed the browser and swiveled my chair toward the window overlooking the backyard, where the swing set lay silent in the moonlight. I remembered the late summer evenings when I waved at Alyssa and Jordan as they tumbled off the swings, whispering, "Time to come in," and guiding them through the back door. I had built that world for them, step by step, dollar by dollar. And now I had dismantled it in a single act. Yet as the night air drifted through the slightly ajar window, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The cold logic of finance had given way to a warmer impulse to redirect these resources towards someone who would cherish them. I opened a second browser tab and typed "New Savings Account," scanning through the list until I found the regional bank where Leah, Carmen's niece, had once confided in me about her dreams of attending college. Leah had always been quiet and serious, the one who lingered after family gatherings to help me clear plates while the others flitted away to phone screens and trending social media updates. I remembered the day she told me her mother's illness had drained the family finances, making her college ambitions seem like a distant star. Her eyes, bright with restrained hope, had haunted me ever since. I navigated to the account application page and filled in the details: her full name, her temporary mailing address, her student email. I printed the form, then signed it with a flourish that felt both reckless and righteous. I typed in my own address for the registration to ensure the bank statements would reach me first, so I could track the deposits and make sure they went to Leah. With the account set up, I closed the laptop and reached for my phone. I thumbed through contacts until I found Leah's name. My thumb hovered above the call button as I thought of how her mother's cough had echoed through the house last Christmas, how volunteers had come and gone with casseroles, never addressing the real need. Tuition, textbooks, a chance to step onto a campus without fear. I tapped call and waited as the line rang. The first click of her voicemail startled me. Her voice, tentative, hopeful, greeting callers with a soft, "Hey, it's Leah." I nearly hung up, unwilling to reveal the lengths I had gone to keep this secret. Then I took a breath and pressed record. "Leah," I said, voice steady though my heart hammered. "It's Miles. I know this might sound unexpected, but I opened a savings account in your name tonight. You'll receive a letter at your address with all the details. I wanted you to have this money for college, so you can go somewhere that actually values your ambition. You don't have to tell anyone where it came from, but I hope you'll use it. You earned it, and you deserve every penny." I paused, picturing that shy smile she gave me when I had asked her if she still wanted to go. "I believe in you," I added softly. "Good luck, Leah." Then I hung up, pressing the side of my phone to my temple as if to merge my thoughts with hers. The rest of the night passed in a haze of paperwork shredding. I disposed of bank statements, old tuition reminders, any trace of my involvement in that fund. I cleared my browser history and taped over the webcam on the laptop, a symbolic gesture of shutting out prying eyes. When I finally returned to bed, the moon had shifted west, and Carmen's side of the mattress was cold and uninviting. I lay on my side facing away from her, my arm curled beneath my head like a shield. For the first time in years, I did not feel hollow. Instead, I felt fierce with purpose. I had taken every cent meant for ungrateful hands and given it to someone with gratitude written in her bones. In the morning, I would wake to the usual routine. The clatter of breakfast dishes, the roar of the coffee maker, the rustle of newspaper pages. Carmen would ask me about the fund, about the deposit she expected, about the check that never arrived. I would smile and nod and feed her whatever lie kept her comfortable. But beneath that practiced calm, I would carry the knowledge that I had chosen differently. I had refused to be the ghost who paid the bills without acknowledgement. I had reclaimed my power in silence and entrusted it to someone who would honor it. And in that quiet act of redirection, I had finally broken free from the role I had played for far too long. Sunday morning began like countless others in this house, the aroma of espresso swirling through the hallway, the clatter of silverware against china, and the low murmur of conversation drifting from the kitchen. I dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and chinos, neutral colors, so as not to draw attention, and checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. My tie was straight, my shoes polished, and my face bore the practiced expression of the devoted husband and stepfather. I packed a small gift for Carmen's brunch, an artisanal loaf of sourdough bread wrapped in linen, and carried it down the stairs. In the kitchen, sunlight spilled through the windows, painting the room in a cheerful glow. The table was laid with a linen cloth, porcelain plates, and polished silverware, and a vase of fresh peonies sat at the center. Carmen stood at the counter, plating avocado toast and fanning a stack of blueberry pancakes. Trevor hovered nearby, hands in his pockets, offering occasionally cheerful chatter to the guests. "Good morning," I said, setting the bread on the counter. My voice sounded steady, even warm. Carmen turned, her white blouse fluttering as she brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. She smiled, the kind of immaculate, reassuring smile that said everything was fine, no matter what lay beneath. "You're on time," she said, reaching for my arm to guide me to the head of the table. "I thought maybe you forgot the time." I shrugged, playing the part of the slightly flustered spouse. I wouldn't miss this for anything. Trevor rolled his eyes playfully from across the room, and he and Carmen shared a quick glance. I let the moment pass without comment, my stomach twisting into a knot that had nothing to do with hunger. Guests drifted in. Neighbors, a couple of Carmen's college friends, and Jordan's best buddy, Alex, whose parents had always been more interested in their phones than the conversation. I greeted each visitor with a nod or a handshake, accepting compliments on the bread and inquiries about how I was doing. I murmured the customary responses. "I'm well. It's lovely to see you. Carmen did a wonderful job." All the while, I mentally ticked off the questions that would soon tumble out, like so many seeds cast on barren ground. Did you sort out the deposit? Have you spoken to the bank? When can we expect the tuition money? Carmen sat at the head of the table, radiant in white, leaning forward to introduce me as though I were an honored guest at my own home. The irony was almost laughable. We took our seats, and Carmen raised her mimosa glass. "To family," she said brightly. "Into new beginnings." The guests echoed the toast, clinking glasses around the table. I sipped mine thoughtfully, letting the bubbles settle on my tongue as I watched Carmen's eyes flick to mine with a question hidden in her smile. I held her gaze, then looked away to inspect the plate in front of me. Perfectly arranged eggs Benedict, asparagus tips, a drizzle of hollandaise. "It looks amazing," I said. "Thank you." She swelled with pride at the compliment, her chest rising as though she had exhaled gratitude into the room. Conversation floated around us, talk of weather, of summer vacation plans, of local news. Then Trevor leaned forward, clearing his throat. "So, Miles, about that tuition fund, any news?" "The kids need to finalize dorm assignments." His tone was casual, but the words struck me like stones in a quiet pond. A ripple of tension passed through the table. Carmen's smile tightened, and her eyes darted to mine. I bowed my head, as if inspecting the schematics of my toast, and said, "I'm still waiting for confirmation from the bank." The single sentence settled on the table like dust. Carmen's favorite aunt, Mrs. Davenport, sighed. "Miles, we all know you've been handling these finances for years. Surely it can't be that complicated." Her voice was sweet but firm, demanding clarity. I swallowed, then nodded. "It's just taking longer than expected," I said. "Banks can be slow, holidays, internal reviews." I paused, meeting Carmen's gaze. She smiled, relieved, and squeezed my hand under the table. The guests murmured assent, and the conversation veered back to weekend sports. I exhaled silently, chest loosening as though I had navigated through a storm. Carmen resumed her questions over toast. "Miles, darling, are you sure it's not a paperwork issue? Maybe I can call the advisor." I kept my tone mild. "I appreciate that, love, but it's the bank's end. I don't want to pester the kids with updates." My words hung in the air like a shield. She nodded, her shoulders relaxing. "Of course," she said. "I just want to help." I offered her a reassuring smile that I hope concealed the steel in my eyes. I had already transferred every cent into the private account. There was no bank delay, only the silence of my resolve. Throughout brunch, I continued to play my part, lifting glasses and toasts, responding to questions about upcoming renovations, laughing at Trevor's jokes even when they landed flat. I watched Carmen beam at her friends, oblivious to my quiet defiance. She thought she had me cornered, believed the power lay in her pressing questions and genteel accusations. But over the past weeks, I had learned that power shifts quietly beneath expectation. I was no longer the ghostly presence who paid unseen bills. I was the architect of my own future, with resources redirected to someone who truly valued them. By the time dessert arrived, a delicate lemon tart and fresh berries, I felt a calm detachment settle over me. Carmen passed behind me to refill my water glass, fingers brushing my shoulder. "Thank you for doing this," she whispered, her voice laced with relief. "I don't know what I'd do without you." I tilted my head, offering her a sympathetic smile. "We're a team," I whispered back, letting the lie slip smoothly from my lips. She nodded and returned to the table. When the meal concluded, guests lingered to chat in pairs. I gathered the empty plates, stacking them quietly by the sink, while Carmen flitted among her friends, still praising the brunch she believed had been saved by my timely attention. I watched her from the kitchen threshold, the afternoon light streaming in behind her, making her hair glow. She was full of good intentions and blind to the fact that the game was already over. I finished with the dishes, wiped my hands on a towel, and stepped into the living room where everyone had gathered around the coffee table. "Thanks again, Miles," Carmen's aunt said, patting my arm. "Let me know if you need anything else." I nodded, murmuring, "Will do." and then turned away, moving toward the front door. Guests began to file out, offering polite goodbyes. I opened the door, feeling the warmth of the sun and freedom in the air. Carmen appeared behind me, her breath catching as she stepped into the sunlight. She reached out, as though to stop me. "Wait, Miles, what about the tuition?" she called, voice wavering. I paused, one hand on the doorknob, and sent her a serene smile. "I'll take care of it," I said softly. "Don't worry." Then I closed the door behind me, leaving her standing there, stunned, as the front porch grew silent. I walked down the steps without looking back, the door clicking shut between us. In that moment, I felt lighter than I had in years, no longer bound by invisible debts, but empowered by a choice that belonged entirely to me. The phone rang just as the first light of dawn crept through the kitchen window, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet like a whip. I reached over the counter, palm brushing the cool porcelain of my coffee mug, and silenced the alarm before grabbing the handset. The screen displayed Carmen's number in red, and I felt a knot tighten in my chest. I pressed answer with measured calm. "Miles, it's the bank." Carmen's voice cracked through the line. "They just called, said the deposit never cleared. The orientation office is calling me too. Jordan and Alyssa can't move into their rooms. They're stuck outside the dorm." Her words tumbled in a rush, desperation woven between every syllable. I leaned against the counter, heart thudding as I imagined my children pacing the concrete sidewalks of the campus quad, weary-eyed under early morning skies, clutching suitcases they could not unpack. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, voice low, controlled. "Let me call them back." I clicked off and dialed the bank's customer service number, the automated voice guiding me through menus I knew by heart. Press 1 for account balances, press 2 for transaction inquiries. My palm silently hovered over 2, then 0 to speak with a representative. I listened politely as the hold music looped, humming its sterile tune, and I waited until a living person came on the line. "Hello, this is Miles Carter." I spoke deliberately. "I'm calling about a transfer scheduled yesterday. I need confirmation it went through." A pause, then the polite rustle of paperwork. "Yes, Mr. Carter, I see your account here. No record of the union account withdrawal or transfer request." I raised an eyebrow, though she could not see me. "So the money wasn't moved?" I repeated. She confirmed it. The world shifted beneath me, like a floor giving way. I hung up and stared at the blank countertop, as though Carmen's words were a phantom echo that no longer belonged to reality. She must have said something else, perhaps that the bank was mistaken or processing was delayed, but it didn't matter. The truth pressed against my ribs. I had taken every cent earmarked for Alyssa and Jordan, rerouted it into my private account. There was no deposit. There had never been a deposit. I tapped the phone against my palm, sending a vibration through the wood grain countertop. My coffee, forgotten, went cold. Images flashed in my mind. Alyssa, tears blurring her perfect cap and gown as orientation counselors shook their heads. Jordan, arms crossed, face flushed with humiliation as he backed away, phone pressed to his ear. Carmen, rushing through paperwork with trembling hands, her eyes rimmed red as she tried to trace the missing funds. My chest pinched, but I did not regret the choice I had made. I called back Carmen before she could call me again. Her greeting was hopeful. "Miles," she said, "are you there?" I took a steadying breath. "Yes," I replied. "The bank says there was no transfer." "I'm sorry." Silence followed. Then Carmen's voice, quivering with disbelief. "What do you mean, no transfer?" I let her calm herself while I measured my words. I thought I had handled it, but it appears I did not. There was an intake of breath. "Miles, how could you?" Her voice cracked as grief and anger warred. She paused, probably to cry, then steadied. "Our kids are freezing outside," she said. "They can't get their keys. They're calling me hysterical." I closed my eyes, picturing the campus gates locking, the procession of real fathers and mothers ushering their children to dorm rooms, while mine stood abandoned. "I'm sorry," I said again, the most truthful phrase I could muster. I wanted to stop being just the guy who paid the bills. Carmen's gasp was like a punch. "So you let them suffer? You let them cry? You let me beg?" She didn't wait for me to answer. She hung up. The dead line weighed heavily in my hand. I stared at the phone as though it had become the instrument of my confession. I poured sugar into my coffee, stirring until the crystals dissolved, but nothing sweetened the bitter resolve I tasted. Half an hour later, I found them. The campus quad was a bustle of students hauling trunks and crying parents embracing through tears. I spotted Alyssa near a cluster of orientation guides, her cap askew, cheeks streaked with tears, and Jordan pacing a few steps behind, shoulders hunched, scowling at the brick facade of the dormitory. I crossed the grass toward them, each footstep sinking into the dewy morning lawn, the smell of fresh-cut grass mingling with anxiety. Alyssa looked up as I approached, eyes red but primed with fear. "Dad," she said, voice small. I swallowed. Even here, calling me Dad felt like an echo of the life we'd once had. I knelt beside her. "I'm so sorry," I said. "I thought I had done it. I made a mistake." She sniffed, pressing a hand to her cheek. "We can't move in," she whispered. "They said without payment, we have no rooms." Jordan joined us, arms folded, jaw clenched. "Is this some kind of joke?" he demanded. His anger was raw, genuine. I looked into his eyes, so much like his mother's, and felt the pang of responsibility twist into remorse. "It's not a joke," I said. "I'm responsible. I wanted to test if you really appreciated me." My voice cracked at the admission. "I thought if you saw me step away, you'd notice." Their faces hardened. Alyssa's lip trembled. "You did notice," she said softly. "We noticed today." She glanced at Jordan, who shifted uncomfortably. "But you didn't need to ruin our future." Her words felt like a verdict. I pressed my palms to my knees, inhaling deeply. "You're right," I said. "I made a selfish choice." The orientation guide approached. "Mr. Carter, will you be paying the deposit today?" she asked kindly, clipboard in hand. I met her gaze and shook my head. "No," I said. The guide frowned, then retreated to speak with her supervisor. I turned back to my children. "I wanted you to understand how it feels," I said, voice firm, though every muscle in me trembled. "To know what it's like to be taken for granted." Jordan's arms loosened. He looked at me, face uncertain. "We didn't mean," he began. Alyssa interrupted gently. "We know you love us," she said. "But love isn't counting paychecks." She stood, smoothing her gown. "We'll figure this out." She motioned to the dorm, where two orientation counselors gestured toward another wing. "We have options," one said. I rose, brushing grass clippings from my knees. Carmen appeared on the edge of the scene, phone in hand, tears in her eyes, her face a portrait of regret. She looked at me, pleading. I glanced at Alyssa and Jordan, standing tall despite their jackets damp with dew. Then I turned back to Carmen. "I stopped the money so you'd see me," I said, voice steady. "Now you have." Carmen's eyes filled. She swallowed, then whispered, "I'm sorry." I nodded once, then stepped aside as the orientation guide led Alyssa and Jordan toward another building. Behind me, Carmen moved forward, hesitating, before she wrapped her arms around me, holding me tight. I closed my eyes against her shoulder, feeling the tremor of her apology vibrate through my body. I stayed still, letting the cool morning air carry away the last shards of my anger. When I finally pulled back, Alyssa and Jordan stood before us. Alyssa's eyes shone with determination. "Let's get this done," she said. "Together." Jordan offered a stiff nod. I looked at them, realizing that this day had fractured us, but it had also made us more real. I reached into my pocket, felt the cold metal of my car key, and flicked it out. "Let's head home," I said, voice firm. "We've got work to do." They climbed into my car, shoulders squared, and I followed them, ready to rebuild trust one brick and one tuition payment at a time. I arrived at the backyard cookout just as the grill's flames flickered into life, sending tendrils of smoke curling toward the afternoon sky. Neighbors and friends milled around the folding tables laden with potato salad, coleslaw, and Carmen's signature fried chicken. The air was thick with the scent of charcoal, laughter, and the low thrum of conversation. Normally, I would have been the one flipping burgers by the grill, greeting every guest with a smile and a refill on their drink. Today, though, I lingered at the edge of the yard, arms crossed, watching the faces I had tried so hard to win over unravel in confusion. Carmen stood at the center of it all, her white sundress stained with flecks of sauce and her expression taut with fury as she confronted anyone who waited too close. When someone casually mentioned college money, she erupted. I heard her voice rise above the general chatter, sharp as a snapped wire. "He took the money. He ruined everything." Conversation stuttered to a halt. The neighbor who'd been praising my homemade potato salad froze mid-spoonful, eyes darting from Carmen to me, as though waiting for an explanation of this unexpected turn. I stepped forward, determined to witness this meltdown in full. I found my place near the picnic table, folding my arms and quietly observing how power shifts when control is wrested away. Carmen's face was flushed as she pointed an accusing finger in my direction. "Miles, how could you? Our kids are scrambling. Their futures are at stake, and you." She stopped mid-sentence, noticing the curious stares from the gathering crowd. My silence hung in the air like a question without an answer, prompting one of the guests, Mr. Patel from next door, to clear his throat. Carmen," he said carefully, "I saw Alyssa earlier. She was so upset she left the campus event." His voice wavered. "Is this true? Did Miles really divert the college fund?" Heads nodded, and whispers threaded through the group. I felt the eyes on me, some sympathetic, some accusatory, most simply astonished. I uncrossed my arms and took a step forward. "Yes," I said, voice carrying enough to reach the far edge of the yard. "I did." The words echoed against the fence and the brick siding of the house. A hush fell like a blanket. My chest tightened, but I held my ground, meeting Carmen's incredulous gaze. "I redirected the money to someone who needed it and valued it," I added, tone calm but resolute. Murmurs rose. A few guests exchanged glances, recalling how I had always been the gracious stepfather, quietly helpful, rarely seen in photos, always behind the scenes. Now they were learning of my rebellion, my strategic strike against the ingratitude I'd endured. A gust of wind rustled the paper napkins on the table. Carmen's voice cracked as she sputtered. You think you're a hero? You think you have the right?" I stepped closer, softening my tone. "I think I had every right to decide where my contribution mattered most. 14 years of sacrifice deserve acknowledgement. I wanted our kids to understand what it feels like to lose something they took for granted." My words landed between us with the weight of truth. Carmen's face crumpled, frustration giving way to raw hurt. She looked at the guests, then back at me as though seeking validation. Instead, she found only quiet sympathy. Jordan, who had been standing off to the side with his arms folded, shook his head. His voice, usually so full of teenage bravado, came out low. "Dad's right," he said, stepping beside me. "We messed up. We never saw what you did for us. We never thanked you." His admission hung in the air, a confession that cut deeper than any of Carmen's accusations. Alyssa emerged from the swing set area, her cap and gown tassels still pinned to her blouse. She looked at me, eyes red but clear. "I'm sorry," she said softly, voice steady despite the tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. "I should have noticed. I should have thanked you." The guests murmured their agreement. Even Trevor, standing awkwardly at the back, shifted his weight. "Me too," he muttered under his breath. Carmen's expression flickered between relief and shame. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Instead, she sank onto a bench and covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. I stayed by Jordan and Alyssa, feeling a swell of protectiveness as they faced the fallout with me. I realized then that my act of financial withdrawal had triggered an emotional reckoning far beyond money. It had exposed the true value of presence, the worth of someone who shows up, time after time, without question. The cookout lingered on awkwardly, guests drifting away in pairs. I offered to help pack up the tables and chairs, but Carmen's aunt placed a hand on my arm. "You did what you had to do," she said quietly. "Our families often overlook the quiet ones." I nodded, accepting her kindness like a lifeline. Later, as dusk fell and the last guest waved goodbye, I found Alyssa and Jordan stacking empty cups by the grill. They looked tired yet determined. Jordan slipped an arm around my waist. "Come on," he said. "Let's get out of here before Mom cries any harder." Alyssa leaned against my shoulder and smiled. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." I guided them toward the car, the yard now deserted except for the lingering scent of barbecue and the faint glow of fairy lights still strung above the stone path. Carmen emerged at the doorway, her eyes red but hopeful. She hesitated, then stepped onto the porch. "Miles," she began, voice thick. I met her halfway, offering my hand. She took it, and I pulled her into a gentle embrace. "I'm sorry too," she murmured into my shoulder. "I never saw you." "I forgive you," I replied softly. When I pulled back, I saw tears in her eyes but also a flicker of understanding. Behind her, the empty cookout tables glowed in the porch light, the night air wrapping around us. For the first time in years, we stood together without pretenses, listening to each other's ragged breaths. The night ended without grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Just three of us standing on the porch, sharing a quiet moment of vulnerability. In that silence, I recognized that the real meltdown had been the collapse of unspoken assumptions, the fall of a facade built on convenience and neglect. And as I looked at Alyssa and Jordan standing by my side, and then at Carmen, her eyes shining with regret and resolve, I knew we were no longer playing parts in a family drama. We were simply people learning to see and appreciate one another. And that was worth every penny and every silent moment that had led us there. I opened my email first, half expecting a routine message from the bank or work reminders, but the subject line read simply, "Thank you, Miles." My thumb hovered over the message for a moment before I tapped to open it. The screen filled with a photograph of Leah standing in front of her freshly painted dorm room door, her eyes shining brighter than the campus lights behind her. Beneath it lay her mother's caption, "My daughter got a second chance. Not because someone had to, but because someone chose to. Thank you, Miles." The image had already racked up dozens of likes, comments from neighbors, teachers, and old friends who remembered the quiet man who once lugged Leah's textbooks and offered him a steady hand. My breath caught in my throat. I reread the words, each syllable a balm to the ache I'd carried since graduation day. This mother, not Carmen, had seen me for who I was and celebrated my choice. I leaned back in my office chair, the hum of the air conditioner suddenly incongruous with the warmth spreading through my chest. My desk phone blinked with calls I knew I should return, but I sat still, tracing the lines of that photograph with my eyes. Leah's mother, once too consumed by worry over medical bills and grocery lists, had taken to social media to share her gratitude, painting me not as a ghost in the background, but as a hero in broad daylight. Comments scrolled beneath the post. Neighbors recalling Saturday mornings when I shoveled snow from driveways, teachers noting how I volunteered in the library, friends marveling that I had always shown up without fanfare or expectation. The digital applause felt surreal, as though the image itself had been casting light into every dark corner of my past. Word spread quickly. By midday, messages began arriving on my phone. Not only from school colleagues who praised my generosity, but also from past acquaintances I hadn't heard from in years. A former boss reached out to congratulate me. An old friend from college sent a private note. "You always were the dependable one. Glad the world's catching on." Even the local newspaper had picked up the story. Local stepdad funds niece's education. Sparks community gratitude. I blinked at the screen. My actions, once hidden in plain sight behind tax forms and bank transfers, were suddenly center stage. I logged onto Facebook to see that Carmen's circle of friends had shared the post as well. Their comments ranged from, "What a beautiful gesture," to "Wish I'd known about this sooner." But I also noticed a few angry responses, Carmen's mother, perhaps, who wrote, "What about MY grandchildren?" and a couple of voices defending Alyssa and Jordan's right to that money. I scrolled past them without flinching. In that moment, I realized I no longer sought approval from everyone. The gratitude of one niece and her mother was enough. My phone buzzed again. I glanced at the caller ID, Carmen. My heart fluttered, but I silenced it and let the call go to voicemail. I watched the unread notification linger, wanting to enjoy this unfiltered recognition before it got tangled in her pleas. She would call soon enough, I knew, because the same people who had cheered my name would tell her what I had done and how the world saw me now. I turned off the screen and stood, moving away from the technology that both broadcast and validated my choice. At 3 p.m., I stood in the lobby of my office building, waiting to leave. The security guard gave me a nod of respect, murmuring, "Saw that post about your niece. Well done." I smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes, and thanked him. I stepped into the late afternoon sunlight, feeling its warmth on my skin as though it were an affirmation of worth. The city sidewalk bustled around me, yet I moved through the crowd with a new lightness, as though each footstep echoed the clicks of 1,000 likes and shares from strangers who now recognized my story. I rounded the corner toward my car when I saw her. Carmen, standing across the street in tears, clutching a small bag of belongings. Her shoulders shook as she scanned the passing faces, searching for me. I paused, the distance between us suddenly vast yet bridgeable. She spotted me, her face crumpling with relief and regret, and began to step forward. I watched her through the window of my parked car as she lifted her trembling hand to hail me, but I did something I had never done before. I turned my back and walked away. The click of my heels against the pavement was steady as I strode past her line of sight. I felt no guilt, only a calm certainty that this path, once so fraught with obligation, had shifted beneath my feet. Carmen's sobs rose behind me, but I did not turn. With every block I put between us, I felt the weight of 14 years of thankless devotion lifting, replaced by the quiet pride of a man whose choice had rippled far beyond the walls of his own family. By the time I reached the familiar street where I had first redirected the funds, the sun dipped low and streetlights flickered on. I paused at the corner, glancing back once. Carmen stood alone, the wind tugging at her hair, a solitary figure amid the blur of traffic and pedestrians. I clenched my jaw against any lingering sympathy, knowing that her grief was part of the consequence I had chosen. With a deep breath, I turned away again, head held high. The post remained active on my phone, a digital testament to an act of kindness that refused to stay hidden. Tomorrow, I would face Carmen, face my children, face every question about loyalty and love. But tonight, I let the echo of "thank you, Miles" carry me forward. For the first time in years, I walked into the gathering dusk unburdened. No longer just the man who paid the bills, but a man who had chosen to reshape his own story and earn the gratitude of at least one person who truly saw him. That night, I pulled up to my new apartment building, an unremarkable brick structure 3 blocks from the old house, and parked beneath the flickering street lamp. The engine's hum died, and I sat for a moment in the hush, hand on the steering wheel, listening to the residual echoes of the life I'd left behind. I thought of Carmen pacing the porch of our former home, Sears pooling at her feet, her voice calling out my name. I thought of Alyssa and Jordan's pleading eyes, and I thought of the apartment key burning in my pocket. I stepped out into the cool air, closing the door firmly behind me. In my hand, I held the simple silver key, the symbol of autonomy I'd carved out with a single, decisive turn of fate. No moving boxes cluttered the hallway, no familiar echoes of laughter or argument. Just the low hum of the city beyond my door. I climbed the narrow staircase to the second floor, each step a deliberate beat marking how far I'd walked away from a life where I'd always been the guy who paid the bills. The door to my unit stood ready, its paint fresh, the nameplate reading simply Miles C. I inserted the key, turned it, and heard the lock click open. Inside, the space was clean and empty, white walls, wood floors, a single overhead light. I crossed the threshold and paused at the center of the room, hands in my pockets, taking in the silence. It felt like potential, like a blank page waiting for a story I would write for myself. Behind me, the hall light flickered as Carmen stepped to the doorway. Her footsteps were tentative, the soft carpet muffling her approach. I turned to see her framed in the hallway, eyes swollen from tears, cheeks pale in the lamplight. She opened her mouth, and I could hear the tremor in her voice before her words formed. "Please, Miles, don't do this." I held her gaze without flinching. My throat felt tight, not from guilt, but from the gravity of the moment. "Carmen," I said quietly, "I've tried to be in your story for 14 years. I've paid every bill, held every hand, wiped every tear. But you never wanted me there. Not really." My words fell between us like slow, deliberate stones. She swallowed. "I made a mistake," she whispered. "They're my kids too. I'll fix this. I'll make them apologize. I'll get them money back." She took a hesitant step forward, as though seeking permission. I straightened, hands dropping to my sides. "No," I replied softly. "It's done. I'm done performing." Carmen's shoulders sagged. She lifted a trembling hand to her mouth, as though tasting her own regret. I watched her, this woman I had loved, this partner who had seen me only as an ATM. Now seeing me for who I truly was, a man with boundaries and pride. "I wish you well," I said, turning away to face the empty room. The single overhead bulb cast my shadow long across the floor. "Goodbye, Carmen." She remained in the doorway as I stepped to the window, looking out at the street below. I didn't hear her go. I only felt the click of her heels receding down the hall. Silence settled around me once more, a deeper silence than any I'd known. But it no longer felt empty. It felt like liberation. I set the apartment key on the narrow windowsill beside a single potted plant I'd brought earlier. Then I walked to the door, closed it gently, and turned the lock. The final goodbye was sealed. And for the first time, I understood that walking away was not an ending. It was the beginning of my own story. I met Leah at the bank early the next morning, the sky still pale and the city streets hushed in dawn's quiet. She waited by the teller window, clutching a single sheet of paper, her new account information. When she saw me, her eyes widened in surprise, and a tentative smile curved her lips. I reached into my coat pocket and handed her a small envelope. "This is everything," I said softly. "No strings. You earned it." Her fingers trembled as she opened the seal and unfolded the letter inside. She read my brief note, words of encouragement, a reminder of her own strength. And I watched her face bloom with gratitude. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked up, voice catching. "Thank you, Miles. I promise I'll make you proud." I nodded, feeling a tight warmth in my chest. For the first time, I wasn't aching to be noticed. I was content simply to give. Later, I drove past the old house one last time. Moving vans lined the driveway, half loaded with furniture and boxes. Carmen sat on the porch step, her head bowed, shoulders hunched beneath a faded cardigan. Jordan and Alyssa hovered near the front door, silent and awkward in their own skin. I slowed, then pulled over. They looked up as I killed the engine. Carmen's eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw the apology there, the recognition I'd long sought. I rolled down the window. "Goodbye," I said simply. Alyssa stepped forward, voice soft. "Thank you for everything," she murmured. Jordan nodded, uncertain. Carmen's lips trembled as she added, "I'm sorry it took me so long." I offered a brief, forgiving smile. "Take care of each other," I said, then closed the window and eased back onto the road. As the house receded in my rearview mirror, its windows dark and empty, I felt no regret, only a sense of completion. The morning light guided me toward Leah's campus, toward new beginnings and uncharted possibilities. I had been the man who paid the bills, now I was the man who changed lives. And as I drove on, I understood that no one was left to blame. Only lives left to rebuild, including my own.